One thing that's so interesting about dismissive avoidance that I was thinking about today is like their emotion, like their like vulnerable emotional side, like literally never factors in to a lot of the things they do or say. Let me give you a couple examples. So like when I first met my ex, who is dismissive avoidant in my opinion, it was before we had even gone on our first date, and we were trying to plan out our first date, right? And he asked me, I didn't even know him yet. Like I had met him one time or like two times through recovery, but I barely knew him. And he asked me if after our first date he could spend the night at my house because it would be easier for him since he had to work in that location in the morning. And I thought that was so interesting. I said no. I was like, "Oh, I don't really feel comfortable with that. I don't really know you well enough yet." And like, yeah. And I thought that was so like interesting because it was almost like, and the more I got to know him, the more true this became, but it was almost like his emotions were not factoring into the equation. He wasn't thinking about like, "Oh, will this make her feel weird or whatever." He's thinking very just like logic minded, like, "Oh, I work in that area. So it makes more sense if I sleep at that house so I can get to work quicker in the morning. That will be more constructive for my daily routine." Like he's not thinking like, "Oh, this is our very first date. Like, maybe it should be more romantic and maybe I should not ask if I can like spend the night, like that might make her feel uncomfortable." Like it's almost like not even factored in. Another example. This was also when we had first gotten together and we had just decided to be in a relationship. He had asked me to be his girlfriend. And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And then he said, "Yeah, I mean, we might as well date because, like, if it doesn't work out, we can always break up." After he said that, I was like, what an odd thing to say. Like, that is just such an odd thing to say. Like, and looking back, it's like the way that they think is just so detached from their emotion. Like, he's just thinking logistically, like, well, if we get into this relationship, it's not like I'm stuck forever. If we don't like each other, I mean, yeah, we don't know each other that well yet. So, like, if we don't like each other, we can always just break up. But he wasn't thinking, like, I wonder how this sentence would make her feel. I remember there being a lot of other times like that too. And now looking back, knowing that he's probably dismissive avoidant, it makes so much more sense. But like, I remember him saying things like, "Yeah, I might go work in," because he did carpentry, and he was like, "Yeah, I might go take a job that's like 6 hours away." And I was like, "How would that work?" And he's like, "Well, I would just have to like live there." And I was like, how does that work though, like for our relationship? And he's like, "Well, I would just like live there for the week and like, maybe come back on the weekends." um like it's just like, are we in a relationship, or like is that like, have you factored in like that we're in a committed relationship? Like have you factored in like, because he would say these things as if like he was already working on that decision, like, "Yeah, I talked to my boss and I'm thinking about taking this job, like 6 hours away." And like, yeah. And I'm like, "Oh, like that didn't seem stressful to you in any way? That didn't." And now I'm like, "Oh, it makes so much sense. He wanted space. He wanted to get away. He needed more time to himself." But of course, they don't know how to tell you that. It's almost like they can be so detached from their own emotions that sometimes they lack tact in the things that they say.